Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's get started and look into the first article. The first article says people are free to choose religion, says the Supreme Court of India. There was a petition that was filed in the Supreme Court of India. According to this petition, there were increasing cases of illegal religious conversion that was taking place in India. So the petitioner files a petition in the Supreme Court of India where he says no district in India is free of any of these black magics, superstition and religious conversion where these religious conversion is being forced and they are being converted by making use of intimidation, threatening tactics, luring them by offering them gift as well as money. In this particular backdrop, the Supreme Court of India was asked by the petitioner to direct the central government and the state government to control the black magic and religious conversion that was being witnessed in India. So the Supreme Court of India looks into this particular petition and has dismissed this particular petition saying that people are free to choose the religion that they want, says the Supreme Court of India. This is where it brings into picture Article 25 of the Indian Constitution. The Supreme Court says that people are free to choose their religion. People have a right under the Constitution to practice, profess and propagate the religion, but this is not absolute, but this has reasonable restrictions. So when we look into Article 25, it is not absolute, but there are reasonable restrictions where the government would be able to impose restrictions on the basis of public order, morality and health. In this particular backdrop, we have to understand what is this Article 25. Article 25 can be divided into four parts: freedom of conscience, right to profess, right to practice, right to propagate. When we look into the first part, it speaks about freedom of conscience. What is this conscience? It is the internal thinking of a particular person. When we speak about Article 25, it is not absolute, which means there are reasonable restrictions, but when it comes to the freedom of conscience, it is absolute in nature. The state cannot interfere with our thought process. Any private individual will not be able to interfere with the freedom of conscience. So the freedom of conscience is absolute in nature. Article 25 is not absolute, but freedom of conscience is absolute. So what is this freedom of conscience? Let's say for example, I am a person who believes that God does not have any form. So it's my personal belief, it's my thought process where I believe that God does not have any form. There might be another person who also believes that God has a particular form. So God can be Akari or he can be a Nirakari. People can worship in the form that they want. People can internalize the God that the way they want. So this is about internal processing of the picture of the God. So the freedom of conscience is absolute. Then we have what is called as right to profess. What is this right to profess? Let's say for example, I am a Hindu. I proudly proclaim that I am a Hindu. Let's say for example, I am a Christian. I say proudly that I am a Christian. Let's say for example, I am a Muslim. So I say that I am a Muslim. So right to profess is a particular person saying that he is a proud Hindu, Christian, Muslim, Sikh, Buddhist, whatsoever. So saying a particular religion and looking after that particular religion is what is called as the right to profess. Then we have what is called as right to practice. What is this right to practice? Let's say for example, I am a practicing Hindu. Let's say I would be able to perform certain rituals. Let's say I would be able to go to a particular temple. Let's say I would be able to perform certain homas and havanas. This is the right to practice. Or let's say for example, I'm a Christian. I attend masses on Sunday. Or let's say for example, I am a Muslim. I go to a particular mosque. I pray to God 5 times a day. These are the right to practices. So any person who's practicing a particular religion, in case there are some rituals, ceremonies and exhibitions that have to be conducted, such will fall under the right to practice. Then we have what is called as right to propagate. Let's say for example, you have certain principles of the religion. So you have to tell to the people or to the world what the religion is all about. So you speak to the people, you debate with them, you put out the points about the religion. That is what is called as right to propagate. So the right to propagate is about transmission and dissemination about the ethos and values, the fundamentals of that particular religion, so that people from other religion have a basic idea about that particular religion. But kindly remember, right to propagate does not mean that illegal propagation by using threat, can be done. In case a person is using threat to convert one person to another religion, that is completely barred under the right to propagate. So in the present discussion, the Supreme Court has gone ahead and said that religious faith is part of the fundamental right to privacy, and any person who is a major, if he is not being converted in the form of threat, in the form of intimidation, in any other case, any person would be able to choose his or her religion, and that is equal to a fundamental right, and it is intricate to right to privacy, says the Supreme Court of India. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says India does have a refugee problem. Let's try and understand what is the author trying to convey. Myanmar is in deep crisis. Why? Because there was a military coup that we witnessed in the country of Myanmar. Because of this military coup, people were not happy with the decision because Myanmar had taken over by the military rule, which is why they started protesting against the military rule. In order to control this particular protest, in order to bring people under the check, the armed forces have attacked people at random on the streets. In fact, they have killed people as well. Because people were getting killed, because people had to go through this particular crisis, some of the people from the country of Myanmar were seeking refuge in India. So what are we discussing here? We are discussing about people who wanted to get over from the region of Myanmar, enter into the fold of India, and they wanted to get the status of refugee status. This is where the author in this particular article says that India has turned away all these refugees or some of the refugees at the Indian border in the northeast. Similar instances have also happened in the past when it comes to the Myanmar Rohingya Muslims, and at the same time there have been instances where refugees have come from Afghanistan and Pakistan, and India has not accepted this particular refugee. So the author says India's refugee policy is currently ambiguous in nature, which has excluded people who are seeking for the protection, and which is why the government of India has to relook about India's refugee policy. In this particular backdrop, let us try and understand what is the meaning of refugee, immigrant, and illegal immigrant. Who is a refugee? Let's say, for example, there is one of the person. This particular person is forced to flee his particular country. Why? Because there is civil and political turmoil in the country that is his native country. In the present situation, let's say for example we have Myanmar. What is happening? There is military coup. What is happening? There are people who are being killed as well. So what we have is the civil and the political unrest, and as a result people are moving from one country into another because they are scared about their lives, because they are apprehensive that if they stay in their country they will be killed, which is why they ask for a refugee status in another country. So refugee is a person who moves from one country to another because of warlike conditions, violence or persecution that is happening in a particular country. Then we have what is called as the immigrant. Who is an immigrant? Let's say for example I'm currently in India. Let's say for example I have huge dreams, big ambitions. So what do? Let's say for example we know for the fact that United States of America is called as a country of dreams. So what do? I want to live India. I want to settle down in United States of America. So I leave India, go to United States of America, ask permission from the authorities of United States of America as a legitimate mean to settle down in USA. So what do? I follow the procedures, I follow the rules put out by the USA authorities so that I become the permanent citizen of United States of America. Such a person is what is called as an immigrant. Then we have a person called as the illegal migrant. Who is an illegal migrant? There are two ways of looking at it. One, let's say for example, as we discussed, for an immigrant, he has to make sure that all the documents are perfect. He has to comply by the rules and regulations of a particular country. But when it comes to the illegal migrant, he does not have any type of documents. He does not comply by the rules of a particular country and enters a particular country in an illegal way because that particular person has entered the country not following the due process of law, not taking the permission of the government. That is why he is called as an illegal migrant. And at the same time, let's say for example there is another person, let's say a foreigner, he's come to India. The government of India has given permission to this particular person. Let's say it is for tourism or for education purposes or pilgrimage, whatsoever it is. So let's say the period that has been given permission by the government of India to this particular person is 1 year. So after 1 year, he has to go back to his home country. But this particular person evades the authorities, stays back in India for a period greater than 1 year. Such a situation is also called as a person who is called as the illegal migrant. So what is happening according to the author in the present situation is we have a lot of ambiguity when it comes to the framework of refugees in India. Why? That is because we have one single law. That single law is called as the Foreigners Act of 1946. So according to the Foreigners Act of 1946, any person, whether it is a refugee, whether it is an illegal immigrant, he will be a person who will be falling under the definition of foreigner. So there is no differentiation between a refugee, there is no differentiation between an illegal migrant. So the author says in case it is an illegal migrant, yes, the government of India has to stop this particular person because he has entered India through the illegal means, through the illegal channels where government has not given permission to it. But when it comes to the refugee, this particular person has to be accommodated by the government of India. Why? Because they fear for their lives, because there is a warlike situation, because they have to escape the persecution, take care of their families. That is why they are coming to India. So because the Foreigners Act of 1946 does not differentiate between the refugee, between the illegal immigrant, that is why there is a lot of ambiguity when it comes to the domestic laws in India, says the author. So the major problem is that the Foreigners Act of 1946 has to clearly understand that a refugee is totally different from an illegal migrant. So this differentiation is currently not present, and as a result all of these people are put under the same bracket, which is why the government may have resisted this particular move to accommodate the refugees who are seeking for the refugee status, says the author. In order to overcome this particular issue, the author says that there has to be number of domestic laws that have to be framed. Why? That is because, let's say for example, as of now India is not a signatory to 1951 Refugee Convention and its 1967 protocol. Kindly remember, this can be very important for your preliminary examination. India is not a signatory to 1951 Refugee Convention and its 1967 protocol. Since India is not a part of this international obligation, it does not have a law. India does not have law for the refugees, which is why India will have to come up with a domestic law. Since we do not have a domestic law explicitly for the refugees, what we currently follow is the principle of ad hocism, or India's principle of refugee is primarily on ad hocism. What is this ad hoc principle? Let's say for example, since we do not have a permanent law, since we do not have a statutory backing, let's say there is one government which may have a particular political affiliation that comes and forms the government in the central government. They may approve of the refugees coming from a particular country, or let's say for example there might be a new political party which might form the government. Since there is lack of law, this political party might approve a particular refugee from a different country. Since we do not have a uniform law, according to the political party, according to that political party's ideologies, it may approve some number of refugees and it may ignore other refugees as well. As a result, what the author calls for is a domestic law. Apart from this, the government of India may also consider the geopolitical considerations as well. What are these geopolitical considerations? Let's say, for example, we take the example of Myanmar. What is happening in Myanmar right now? We have the military coup. In case we do accept the refugees who are moving away from Myanmar, and India does happen to give shelter to these refugees, this means that Myanmar will start ignoring India. Why? That is the geopolitical compulsion. Because we protect them, what will happen? Myanmar will start getting closer to China, and if it is getting closer to China, they might not listen to the words of India, and at the same time, all the operations like the insurgency operations where India has taken the help of Myanmar may not be able to achieve. That is why India has to listen to this geopolitical considerations if it has a principle of ad hocism. So the author in this particular case says that if India had a law, India had a statutory backing, all these ideological preferences of a particular political party will not come into picture, and at the same time it will always have the backing of a permanent statutory body. In the past, when we look at what has happened with respect to India, India is one of those countries which has accepted the refugees with open arms. Let's say, for example, we have the Tibetans, we have the Tamil refugees from Sri Lanka, or let's say, for example, the Chakmas of the Bangladesh, or let's say, for example, the Lotsampas of Nepali origin from Bhutan, or the Afghans, the Somalis, or n number of people from different parts of the country, from different regions of the continent. So all have been embraced by India. But at the same time, India does not have a permanent law. India is not signatory to the 1951 convention. That is because this particular convention basically identifies only two types of rights. One is what is called as a civil, the other is what is called as political rights. The third is what is called as the economic rights or the economic obligations, which is not present under the 1951 Refugee Convention. Why is this economic right or the economic obligation not present? That is because, let's say, for example, there are huge number of people who live African continent or African countries, and they start moving towards European countries, which happens to be most of the developed countries. And at the same time, let's say, for example, people start moving from Mexico, or let's say, for example, people start moving from South America to United States of America. They have to take the economic brunt as well, which is why the civil and political right violations is present in the 1951 convention, and that is not present when it comes to the economic rights. When you adapt the same to India, why has India not accepted the 1951 convention? That is because India is in the hub of the South Asia. When you consider the countries in and around it, we have Bangladesh, we have Myanmar, we have Afghanistan, we have Pakistan, we have Nepal, and India is one of the good countries, developing countries, and we have large number of resources as well. Let's assume for a moment that there are large number of issues in Bangladesh, Myanmar, Bangladesh, as we witnessed in 1971. When such issues happen, there is influx of the refugees that these people might see. When there is influx of the refugees, this will bear the brunt on the India's economic resources, and no country will support us, but we have to support all these people. So what is happening? The cost for India will start increasing, the economic problems for India will start increasing, and as a result, India is not signatory to the 1951 Refugee Convention and 1967 Protocol. So India, as and when, according to its trends, will be accepting the so-called refugees, and at the same time we do not have any of the membership with other countries where these developed countries also provide money to India, and as a result India is not part of this 1951 Refugee Convention. So what is the way forward? What should be done going forward in order to address the refugee crisis? India should come up with a domestic refugee law. As of now, we have only Foreigners Act of 1946. So India should come up with a law explicitly focusing on the refugees, and it should have all the due concerns that have to be addressed in this particular legislation. India will have to make a distinction between the temporary migrant workers, illegal immigrants, and the refugees. As of now, the Foreigners Act of 1946 clubs the refugees and the illegal migrants. This is where the differentiation will have to be made in the near future if India is coming up with a domestic refugee law, is the point that the author is emphasizing. The last important factor is with respect to the international efforts. Let's say, for example, when there are refugees who are coming from Myanmar or from any other country, what should India do? India should discuss with that particular country, let's say Myanmar in this particular case, understand what are the various issues between these refugees and the government, and ensure that there are resettlement efforts between the government as well as the refugees. And at the same time, India should also enter into agreements, memorandum of understanding with number of countries world over, and should also seek economic support from the developed countries as well. So going forward, what India requires is not short-term measures. What India requires is long-term approach, a balance that needs to be established both between the human rights as well as the security. If India is able to achieve all of this, what we will have is a refugee policy going forward, says the author in this particular article. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says time test ties. The article here is speaking about India and Russia relationship. What is the context? We recently had the Russian foreign minister who made a short visit to India. In this particular backdrop, the article discusses about what was the epicenter, focus point of the discussion between Russia and India, and at the same time it speaks about various divergent points that India and Russia are witnessing of late. First up, we will understand what was the importance of this particular meeting. Russia and India discussed about manufacturing of Russian military equipment in India under the program of Made in India. So they were discussing that India and Russia will come together, manufacture the Russian military equipments in India, and there will be transfer of technologies with respect to India and Russia. So the first agreement or the talks that was held was in reference to manufacturing of Russian military equipment in India. We have one of the summits called as the India-Russia Summit. This usually takes place annually, and this is a summit that happens at the highest level involving the President of Russia and the Prime Minister of India. So this is a particular summit that takes place between the heads of the country where they discuss about the ties between Russia and India. So this particular ties will be taken up in this particular year. So the foreign ministers came together. They wanted to discuss what would be the agenda and objective of this particular meeting. So this particular meeting of foreign ministers was also about what should be the agenda of India-Russia summit. On the bilateral front, both the sides wanted to enhance and cooperate on the energy front, nuclear front, and also the space sector as well. When it comes to the international free trade, we have one of the unions called as the Eurasian Economic Union. This particular union is a free trade union consisting of Armenia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Russia. Kindly remember, it can be very important from your preliminary point of view. The Eurasian Economic Union consists of all these 5 countries, and this can be a prospective question in your preliminary examination. So what did the foreign ministers speak about? The foreign ministers discussed as to how India can enhance on its trade relationship cooperation with the Eurasian Economic Union. That was also the focus of this particular talks. Apart from this, they also wanted to improvise on the investments in the International North-South Transport Corridor and Chennai Vladivostok Eastern Maritime Corridor as well. So the investments with respect to this issue was also spoken by the foreign minister. Finally, they did speak about the Afghanistan issue as well. On one side, they spoke about how the issues in Afghanistan will have impact on India. These were the discussions and the focus points when it comes to this particular discussion between India and Russian foreign ministers. But the author in this particular case speaks about diverging points where India and Russia have strain in their relationship which is what needs to be addressed in the near future, says the author. What are these divergent points? Russia and China have very good relationship right now. Why? That is because they have a common enemy, and that happens to be United States of America. On one side, United States of America is imposing sanctions on Russia. On the other side, it is not having good relationship. There is trade war that is happening with China as well. So one common enemy both these countries have is with respect to United States of America. So Russia and China have closer bonding of late. But India has issues with China. So Russia and China getting closer is not good for India, as Russia always needs India and India always needs Russia for the understanding. And at the same time, Russia also feels that India has a policy of India's Indo-Pacific strategy. So what is this Indo-Pacific strategy? The emphasis here is on the oceanic condition. When we speak about Indo-Pacific strategy, the author brings into picture the Quad. When we speak about Quad, what we have is United States of America, which is the enemy of Russia in the present situation. So United States of America and India are getting closer, which is not good for Russia. And during this particular discussion between the foreign ministers, while India spoke about the oceanic strength of Indo-Pacific strategy, Russia emphasized on Asia-Pacific region. So on one side, India was focusing on the oceanic conditions, but Russia was focusing on the continental conditions. So what do we see is a drift in strategies when it comes to India as well as Russia. Russia, when it comes to Afghanistan, is also speaking in terms which is totally in conflicting in nature when it comes to India. How? Russia is giving a push to Taliban. That is, they want power to be distributed between the government and Taliban when it comes to Afghanistan. But India is looking at democracy where there is only the government which is sharing the power, and it is only the government which is taking care of the apparatus in Afghanistan. So what we actually witness once again is a conflict where Russia wants Taliban to be the part of the government, where India does not want Taliban to be the part of the government. So what we actually witness is conflict between India and Russia when it comes to operations in Afghanistan. Finally, what we have to take into picture is the relationship between Pakistan and Russia. When we look at the historical picture, India and Russia had a beautiful relationship. India did import the concept of Soviet socialism as well, and India was a close associate when it comes to Russia, the erstwhile Soviet Union as well. But of late, because India is getting closer to United States of America, making imports when it comes to defense, what we actually witness is that Russia and Pakistan may also have got into talking mode as well. What we have is the foreign minister who has recently confirmed that Russia will provide Pakistan with the counter-terrorism strategy, and it will also provide enough number of equipments as well. This sent shockwaves to India. So what we actually witness is number of divergent points between India and Russia when it comes to the overall relationship. So the author in this particular case says that since there are divergent points, India and Russia will have to remove them. They have to come up together. They have to bridge the gap together. All the convergent points will have to be enhanced, and more cooperation across different sectors will have to be enhanced, is what the author is trying to emphasize with this article. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says a disturbing order. We have a civil court in Uttar Pradesh. This civil court recently has asked the Archaeological Survey of India to conduct a survey of Ganavapi Mosque, which is in Varanasi, for what? To conduct a particular survey if there was a temple before the construction of this particular mosque. This article currently goes on to say that such an order passed by the civil court in Uttar Pradesh is violating two of the legal principles. One, it has not given importance to the places of worship, Special Provisions Act of 1991. We will not be discussing about this. That is because we have already discussed in the past few weeks about the same issue. and at the same time there was an Allahabad High Court which had also reserved the order on this very case when it comes to the Gyanavapi Mosque in Varanasi. While there was a particular order which was reserved by the High Court, there was a particular order whose decision would be given by the Allahabad High Court. Why did the civil court in Uttar Pradesh violate one, the law which was already present, and the Allahabad High Court order which will be given by this High Court in the next few days? So the article here primarily says that because such an order has come into picture, this can increase the religious extremism in that particular region, and at the same time this can also open new windows for a couple of other disputes when it comes to religious places, and as a result what we will have is the social fabric disturbance in India where religious disputes will come back to haunt the people, says this article. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the mains practice questions. There is an urgent need to clinically address the issue of refugee protection in India and put in place appropriate legal and institutional measures. Discuss. Next question. India and Russia have to dispel the notion that their ties are under strain by diversifying their areas of cooperation. Comment. So please write both your answers on the comment section. Peer review, give positive feedback to your friends' answers. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.